Hi you guys, this video is going to teach you how to convert a fraction to a percent and or a percent to a fraction. Okay, so with that said, let me go ahead and show you a couple of different ways that you can write a fraction as a percent. Now remember that whenever we're talking about a percent is something out of 100. Okay, so one thing that you can do is you can take the fraction and you can make an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100. Okay, so to get from 5 to 100, we have to multiply by 20. And if I multiply the bottom by 20, I'm going to have to multiply the top by 20. And so we would end up with 20 hundredths. Okay, and 20 hundredths, anytime you have something out of 100, you can write that as a percent. Okay, so 20 out of 100 is 20%. So that's one way that you can do this. Okay, you can make the denominator equal to 100, and then anytime you've got something out of 100, that is a percentage. Okay, another way that you can do this is you can take this fraction of 1/5 and you can change it to a decimal. To change 1/5 into a decimal, we take the 1, we divide by 5. Okay, and so we would get 0.20. Once we have the decimal, to go from a decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. So if you take 0.20 and you times by 100, that gives you 20%. Now, I don't care which way you want to use as you're converting these fractions to a decimal. I think that if the denominator can easily be made into 100, I think that's probably the easiest way. But if you like changing the fraction to a decimal and then multiplying by 100, feel free to use that method as well. So let's look at a few more of these here. If we want to change 9/10 into a percent, one way we can do that is we can make an equivalent fraction of 100. Okay, so to get from 10 to 100, we can make an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So to get from 10 to 100, we had to multiply 10. And if we multiply the bottom by 10, we have to multiply by the top by 10. And 9 times 10 is 90. 90 out of 100 is just 90%. Okay? Another way that we can do this is we can take the 9/10 and we can turn this into a decimal. Now this one's pretty easy to turn into a decimal. 9/10 is just written like this. Okay? And then if we want to go from a decimal to a percent, we just have to times by 100. And when you're taking 0.9 and you times by 100, this decimal is just going to move 2 places to the right, basically. And then you'd fill in your 0 here. That's how you get your 90%. Okay, let's look at another one, 3/20. So to change 3/20 into a percent, using the method where you make an equivalent fraction to 3/20 with a denominator of 0. To do that, okay, sorry you guys, I think I was talking without the video on, and I don't know where I left off. So right here is the 3/20. I used 2 different methods here. So on the first one, I changed the denominator to be 100. And then 15 out of 100 is 15%. On the second one, I took the top number divided by the bottom number, which gave me 0.15. And then to change that into a percent, to go from a decimal to a percent, you just times by 100. And so that's how we get 15%. Now from here, I would like you guys to try 2/5 on your own. So push pause. Try making 2/5 into a percent, and then push play and see if you did it correctly. Okay, so 2/5 if you are using the method where you make an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100, to get from 5 to 100, you would multiply by 20. If you multiply by the bottom by 20, you have to multiply the top by the same thing. 2 times 20 is 40. So 40 hundredths is just 40%. Remember, anytime you have something out of 100, you can easily write that as a percent. Okay, now if you're using the decimal way, where you change this fraction to a decimal, okay, 5 goes into 24 times, so that would give us a 0.4. And then to go from a decimal to a percent, we have to multiply by 100. And when you take 0.4 and you multiply by 100, you're basically going to move the decimal 2 places to the right, add a 0, and a percent sign. Okay? So 0.4 is basically just 40%. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and move on to the next set of examples where we need to express each percent as a fraction in simplest form. Okay, so there are 2 different ways that you can do this. The first way is that you know if it's 60%, a percent is always something out of 100. So you could write this as 60 over 100. Okay, now from there, this is just 60 hundredths. Okay, so to write that as a decimal, it would just be 0.60. In this case, we needed to write it as a fraction in simplest form. So 60 hundredths, to simplify that, we would find the factors of 60. So 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 5 and 12, 6 and 10, okay? And then for 100, we would have 1 and 100, 2 and 50, 4 and 25, 5 and 20, and then we need to find the greatest common factor. Okay, so common factors, you can see we have 1, we have 2, we have a 5. These are all common factors, right? And then we have 20. Our greatest common factor, though, the biggest number that they have in common would be 20. So to simplify 60 hundredths, we would divide the bottom by 20, the top by 20, and that would give us 3/5. So 60% as a fraction in simplest form would be 3/5. Okay, let's go ahead and try the next one. Okay, 80%. We know that if it's 80%, that means that the fraction would be 80 out of 100. And then from there, we need to write this in simplest form. And just as a reminder, if we wanted to write this fraction as a decimal, 80 hundredths looks like this. Okay, but on this assignment, we're writing it as a fraction in simplest form. So 81 hundredths, let's find our greatest common factors between 80 and 100. So 1 and 80, 2 and 40, 4 and 20, 8 and 10. Let's do 1 and 100, 2 and 50. I think I've got them all. 4 and 25, 5 and 20, 10 and 10. Okay, so when we look at these, our greatest common factor here would be 20. There are quite a few common factors, but the biggest number that they have in common is 20. So if we take the 80 hundredths and we divide both the bottom and the top by 20, 100 divided by 20 is 5, and 80 divided by 20 is 4. Okay, so 4/5. That's what 80% is as a fraction in simplest form. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at another example. We're going to change 75% into a fraction in simplest form. So 75% is equivalent to 75 hundredths. Okay, and then from there, we need to find the greatest common factor between 75 and 100. And by now, I think you guys are pretty good at finding the greatest common factor, and it would be 25. And then 100 divided by 25 is 4. 75 divided by 25 is 3. So 75% as a fraction in simplest form is 3/4. Okay, now I want you guys to try this one and this one. So go ahead and push pause. I want you to try writing these percent in a fraction as simplest form, and then push play, and I will go over the answers with you. Okay, so hopefully you have tried these on your own. 10% is 10 out of 100. And then to write that in simplest form, 10 over 100 would simplify to 1/10. Okay, and remember 1/10 as a decimal would just be 1/10. Okay, let's look at 5%. 5% would be 5 over 100, or 5 out of 100. That's what 5% is. And so then to simplify this, our greatest common factor between the top and bottom would be 5. 5 goes into 5 once. 5 goes into 100 20 times. Okay, 1/20. Now, 1/20 is our simplest form. Okay, now with that said, you are ready to move on to the next learning activities. Okay, one of which is this. I want you guys to take out a piece of paper, and I want you to try doing these questions 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. At this point, we have learned how to do all of these skills. So number 2 says write 45% as a fraction. Number 3 says write 3/5 as a decimal. Number 4 says write 1/9 as a decimal. Number 5 says write 45 hundredths as a percent. And number 6, write 1 as a percent. So I want you to take just a second, and I want you to use all of the things that we've learned so far and see if you can do these questions. There's actually 5 questions here. So push pause, try these on your own paper, and then push play, and I will go over the answers with you. Okay, so here we go. To write 45% as a fraction, remember 45%, to write that as a fraction, that means we have 45 hundredths. And then if we're going to write that in simplest form, 5 is the greatest common factor between 45 and 100. And so 5 goes into 45 9 times, 5 goes into 100 20 times. Okay, so 9/20 would be the fraction. The next one, write 3/5 as a decimal. So remember, to write a fraction as a decimal, you take the top number, you divide by the bottom number. 5 doesn't go into 3, so we add a decimal and a 0. 5 does go into 30 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. So 3/5 as a decimal is 0.6. Okay, the next one, write 1/9 as a decimal. So to write 1/9 as a decimal, we take the 1, we divide by 9, we add a decimal 0. 9 goes into 10 one time. 1 times 9 is 9. 10 minus 9 is 1. Add a 0, bring a 0 down. 9 goes into 10 once. 1 times 9 is 9. 10 minus 9 is 1. At this point, when you can see that this is a repeating decimal, 1/9 is actually a repeating decimal, then you can write this with the repeating bar over the part that repeats. So 0.11 repeating. The 1 is what repeats. Okay, you don't have to keep dividing that out forever and ever. As soon as you realize that it's a repeating decimal, you can use the repeating decimal line. Okay, write 45% as a fraction. Well, to write this as a fraction, 0.45, when we look at this, this is really just 45 hundredths. So if we can say it using place value and then write it, 45 hundredths now makes it really easy for us to write the percent, because anything out of 100 can be written as a percent. So 45 hundredths is really 45%. And then the last one, write 1 as a percent. Well, to write 1 as a percent, we could times it by 100, and we would get 100%. If you have the whole thing, you always have 100%. Okay. Now you are ready to do your first assignment. So I want you guys to take out a piece of paper. You can use the one that you've already been working on. And I want you to do all of the questions here. You are changing either a fraction to a decimal in percent, or a decimal to a fraction percent, or a percent to a fraction in decimal. So in this class, I want you to easily be able to go back and forth between the different versions of the same number. Okay? So with that said, go ahead and push pause, work on this assignment, and then push play, and I will correct the assignment with you. Okay, you guys, I know my writing on here isn't the best. I tried my best to write with my pen, but sometimes it looks a little scribbly. So hopefully you guys can see the answers here. I want you to go ahead and correct your own. And if there were any that you missed on this, will you please bring them back to me so that I can help you before you move forward. Okay, so now with that, I want you to go ahead and move on to the next thing in your Canvas. Okay, and the next thing in your Canvas is the learning activity, rational or non-rational numbers. So go ahead and move to number 7 on your list.